Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our DAT weekly market update. This is our update for December 14th, if you can believe it. I'm Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics here at DAT. I'm joined by Ned Damon, who's our Principal Data Scientist, Dean Croak, Principal Industry Analyst, and very special guest, Chris Kaplis, who is our Chief Scientist. A lot of chiefs, a lot of scientists here this morning. How's it going, guys?
Great. Doing all right. It's snowing in Portland, if you can believe it, which is kind of wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't get the memo. I feel like one of these things is not like the other. I am not sporting my ugly Christmas sweater. I'm very embarrassed.
You mean they don't let you teach at MIT with a shirtless Santa riding a horse with a platinum candy cane chain?
No, it's actually banned in the school bylaws.
Ivy League. What are you going to do?
When you say that, you have that wild Frank Gehry building. What's the one that looks like something out of Dr. Seuss?
Here, the Stata Center. Yeah,
it's
like it's falling down.
Yeah,
that you can do. You just can't wear dinosaur sweaters.
Funny. So this is a very special show. That's why we have Chris on. We did this last year as well. It's our Nostradamus episode, which are basically our 22 predictions, 21 recap. We're going to kind of treat it pretty informally this year and just bounce some thoughts and questions and ideas off each other towards the end. But we're going to start the show traditionally, as we always do, with our key points, and then Dean will work through his market update. But if you do have any questions for us, still feel free to drop them in the chat or comment section below. We should have ample time to answer those at the end, even though we're going to be doing some discussions internally here. We can even run long, honestly, if there's a bunch of questions that come in. But with that, I will turn it over. Actually, I won't yet. I'll go to key trends we're watching and do key points of the week first. So spot rates are up, but again, showing a bit of a cresting pattern. Dean will get more into that. We can sort of read some of the tea leaves of load volumes and load to truck ratio to see how rates might be trending. TU imports, you're starting to see some west to east shift with the East Coast and Gulf up, West Coast ports down a bit. I think that's mainly a throughput issue. Reads across America, Sunday the 18th, 75 drivers, multiple fleets are inbound with wreaths. Produce imports from Mexico are up 11%. Two things not on here I think worth mentioning that I'm assuming Dean will cover, if not we'll cover at the end, is there was a major bankruptcy. I don't know if it was a bankruptcy, it was just a flat out closing of a major trucking company this past week, which we can touch on later. And then also the major weather event that happened across broad swaths of the Southeast and even into the upper Midwest. So again, a couple other things that didn't make this cut, but I think worth talking about later today. So with that, I will turn it over to Dean to walk us through the market update. Dean?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Let's start off the update with the dry van load board activity. On our top 100 lanes, loads moved back to pre-Thanksgiving levels. They were up 20% last week. Carriers were posting more equipment last week compared to this time last year. A little bit of a sign of capacity tightness possibly. As a result, the load to truck ratio decreased by 31% to 5.46. Taking a look at the refrigerated load board, load to truck ratio, loads moved in the reefer sector increased by 3% last week. Also signs reefer capacity is easing. We'll talk about rates in a minute, but there was a decrease in load posts and also an increase in equipment posts. So as a result, the load to truck ratio moved down to 9.04. Taking a look at the flatbed load to truck ratio, we've seen some pretty high temperatures this time of the year. In fact, some states are seeing records for December. A lot more activity in the flatbed market as a result. Number of loads moved on our top 78 busiest flatbed lanes was up 2% last week. But like reefer and dry van sectors, there are signs capacity is easing slightly. When we track equipment posts, they were up 11% last week, back to about pre-Thanksgiving levels. As a result, the load to truck ratio moved to 44.05. So taking a look at our market condition index, Ken touched on some of the weather. Some tragic weather in the Midwest with tornadoes, also heavy snow out in Rawlings, Wyoming in particular, shut down I-80 and I-90. I spoke to some carriers who were shut down from last Thursday evening until Sunday afternoon, so they lost about 3 days. A lot of those carriers were looking for Monday morning deliveries, as in yesterday. There'll be some very late loads this week, and of course carriers losing 3 days of productivity is not a good thing this time of the year. Looking at national volumes, load post volumes in our top 10 markets dropped 15% last week. Houston was the only market in the top 10 to post a gain. Load post volumes were up 5% week over week. In the top 10 markets, average spot rate was down 1 cent per mile to 2.93. That makes it the third week in a row. Spot rates have been dropping in the top 10, down 4 cents a mile since Thanksgiving. In Houston, as we just mentioned, outbound loads last week were up. Spot rates climbed 4 cents a mile to an average of 227. Loads moved were up on major lanes out of Houston to Los Angeles, up 15% last week. Loads to Atlanta up 13%, and Chicago up 6%. On the spot rate side out of Houston, Chicago was paying 227, up 9 cents a mile on the November average, while loads east to Atlanta were up 16 cents a mile to an average of 281. Back on the West Coast, on one of the busiest retail freight lanes in the spot market, Los Angeles to Stockton, rates are up $1.50 per mile compared to this time last year, currently averaging $4.86, excluding fuel. Having a look at the refrigerated market, capacity eased a little bit in our top 10 markets as the average spot rate dropped 4 cents a mile to an average of 327. It's down 13 cents a mile since Thanksgiving. On the top 10, or just outside the top 10, some of the produce markets in Texas were showing some activity. In McAllen, spot rates inched higher by 1 cent per mile, averaging 258 outbound for all loads. Load posts have been steadily climbing for the last 3 weeks. As we know, produce volumes are starting to climb. They'll start to peak a little bit closer to January when we get into avocado season before Super Bowl. Loads from McAllen to Atlanta at 218 a mile. Loads to Brooklyn continue to climb, though. In particular, loads to the big produce market in Hunts Point. McAllen to New York City averaged 307, excluding fuel last week. That's up 50 cents a mile since September. And in contrast, capacity eased on DAT's number one reefer lane between Atlanta and Orlando. Spot rates are down 38 cents a mile since November to an average of 385. And on the West Coast, reefer rates from Los Angeles to Las Vegas are up $1.52 per mile compared to this time last year. Line haul rates on that lane are currently at $6.34 this week. Wrapping up our market condition index with our flatbed look, loads moved in the flatbed network are down 13% in the last 4 weeks despite the late season surge in activity. They normally dip this time of the year, except in markets like Medford and Portland. Demand for Christmas trees has driven up spot rates by 32 cents a mile last week to an average outbound rate of $3.48. On the run from Medford to Los Angeles, that's a high volume lane for Christmas trees. Rates are up to $3.46 per mile. That's almost $1 per mile higher than October. Medford to Stockton, $3.72. Portland to Los Angeles, spot rates are up 6 cents a mile last week, averaging $2.95. So wrapping up our market index, market update with our look at year-over-year spot rates in the dry van sector last week. Spot rates in dry van remained relatively flat, stayed at $260 per mile. On our top 100 lanes, spot rates were down on double the number they were up, still 14% or 38 cents a mile higher than this time last year. Having a look at the year-over-year market for reefers, spot rates for temperature-controlled equipment have plunged by 9 cents a mile since their record high of 304 right before Thanksgiving. On our top 72 reefer lanes, spot rates were up on just 8 of 72 lanes last week. As a result, the spot rate dropped 4 cents a mile last week to a national average of $2.95, still 58 cents a mile higher than this week last year. And wrapping up with flatbed, even though there is higher week-over-week volumes of freight in the flatbed market, capacity ease, spot rates dropped 1 cent per mile. National average ended last week at $2.56, excluding fuel. That's still 36 cents a mile higher year over year and 52 cents a mile higher than this time last year. So that's it for this week's market update. If you'd like to find out more about what's happening in freight, go to dat.com/market update and download the long form version of today's report. Over to you, Ned, for the short-term forecast.
Hi, everybody. We've got some pretty spicy forecasts this week. So, I suppose that's apt for the Nostradamus show. We're going to begin with dry van. You can see in blue the market rates observed by DAT. And then off to the right, you can see our forecast. In green is our ratecast model, which is our flagship model. And you can see that it has an expectation of continued growth with acceleration as we head into the Christmas season, and then flattening out after about 8 to 10 cents of gains once we have hit the early part of January, maybe with the signs of an early downturn. Our short-term model is expecting more moderate growth with a much tighter Christmas peak, and with no signs of that moderation happening in the very tail end of the forecast. That short-term forecast is, of course, in red. In gold and silver, we have our blended forecasts, which are mixtures of these two forecasts in different amounts and in different ways. And here you can see that the blended forecasts are leaning a little bit more towards the ratecast model, with a more aggressive growth pattern and a little bit more spread out holiday peak, and maybe a little bit of trailing off once we get into the early part of January. Next, the reefer. This is the really spicy boy. We have very strong model divergence. Once again, in blue are the market rates observed by DAT. In green, the flagship ratecast model is expecting a huge amount of growth over this next period. Looks like 20 cents of growth over the next 3 weeks, and then an equally sharp dip down as we head into the early part of January. In contrast, the short-term model is expecting an overall downward trend of about 5 cents over that same period, with a very sharp peak right at the holidays. And the blended forecasts in gold and silver are leaning a little bit more towards the short-term model, although they do see a little bit more growth expected in the early part of the December period. Finally, on to flatbed. We can see once again in blue the market rates observed by DAT. Once more, there's pretty strong model divergence. The ratecast model is expecting some kind of a little blip coming up, followed by a overall large holiday pattern, maybe about 7 cents of travel, heading in upwards, heading into Christmas, and that the ratecast model is once again in green. In red, our short-term model is expecting more or less flat with a spike for Christmas. And the blended forecasts are leaning a little bit more towards the ratecast model, although they are naturally a little bit more muted than the ratecast model. And that is it for our short-term forecast. And it's time for our IQ question of the week, which is, what are our freight market predictions for 2022?
Right.
Well, that is the big question, right, Ned?
Yeah.
So who wants to start and ask a question to the group?
So my question is, at what point do we expect there to be a crossover between the growth of truck inventories and the growth of carriers, the actual like butts in seats? Because right now, both of these are limiting factors, but everybody has been talking about a carrier shortage. But from everything that I have seen, it is much more on the equipment side rather than on the human side. But at some point, presumably, there is going to be a crossover, and I'm interested in people's perceptions of that.
The shortage, I mean, one of the big things we saw in 2021 and 22 is the number of contract drivers who went out on their own, right? So the number of carriers went way up, but the total number of drivers didn't change that much. So capacity didn't change too much, because I know the large fleets are still struggling to get that extra capacity. So are you saying, Ned, that are you asking when will that change? I guess I missed the question.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially there. Like it's a two-part model, right? Like you need the equipment and you need the carrier. And for a lot of folks, you are seeing shortages on both. But my perception has been, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, that the equipment side shortage has been more of a strong pull than the carrier side, the actual driver side shortage.
I think that's true, mainly for trailers, because and chassis and things like that, because they're so tied up. And so I think that will start freeing up probably at the end Q1, Q2, once this fourth quarter rush goes down. I don't know. What do you think, Dean? When do you think the equipment will free up?
I think I look at it a little bit differently, Chris. I think we're certainly seeing summer before we see some of the clearer indicators. But this week we had loads moved or up and capacity eased. Now, 1 week doesn't make a long-term trend, but my take is that it's not so much an equipment shortage. It's what we talked about in freight buying last week, and that's it's a velocity shortage. I'm already seeing, as warehouses get more staff, we have more dock doors open, trucks are getting loaded quicker, the velocity of trucks through the network is starting to increase. That's anecdotal evidence. It'll take some time to see if that's the case. But I think the real problem is not so much equipment, but the delays that truckers have been experiencing loading and unloading. notwithstanding weather. So I think that'll ease as soon as we start to see supply chain disruptions.
But Dean, isn't that cause in some respect for equipment shortages? Because, for example, trailers are not being unloaded, chassis, and that's slowing them down at the nodes. I agree, the nodes are the problem, not the arc in the network.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's part of the problem. We've seen a lot more drop on hook because of that. Trailers are being used as mobile warehouse space. So again, once the supply chain disruptions ease, demand, maybe decreases. That remains to be seen. Those trailers start to free up.
Yeah, I mean, I think one interesting thing to watch in 22 is going to be almost like the phantom demand for, so how do you measure existing demand for power units and drivers that are coming up short of actual inventory of drivers and power units? And then as that demand diminishes, as we expect things to flip next year, and there's still a shortage getting things on the road, I think we could reach equilibrium a little bit faster because those things wouldn't have been delivered yet. So what's the classic cycle? Rates are really, really high. Carriers order a ton of equipment. They get a bunch of equipment. It drives rates down. Rates plummet. That equipment essentially goes onto the used market as carriers go bankrupt. But if they haven't actually taken possession of any of the equipment yet, and it basically just manifests as a canceled order, not a repossessed or turned in truck, we could not see the violent correction that we typically see every cycle. So I think that'll be something interesting to watch, and maybe a little bit of a hot take into 22.
Yep.
Because these trucks are going to get a lot more expensive. What's Jerome Powell going to start doing? Probably the very, very beginning of next year. Start slowing buying. And what's that going to cause? Interest rates to go up. How many truck drivers, Dean, are buying their trucks with cash?
Hopefully not many.
Right. So they're going to have to borrow money.
Right.
What's happening to insurance prices next year? Across the board for every single owner-operator or small fleet.
Exactly.
Up. So keep that in mind.
So do you think, Ken, that's really interesting. Do you think we'll see a migration of those owner-operators back to fleet? Because large fleets have lower insurance. Everything, their costs are lower. They just are. And so we think we'll migrate back, but that won't necessarily increase capacity.
It will for the large fleets.
Yeah. So that will hurt that might hurt the brokers because some of their capacity. Because right now those owner-operators rely almost exclusively on the brokers.
Yep.
Interesting.
So I have one. Diesel. Hot topic. Diesel. This time next year. Well, I was actually asking about the cologne. So diesel, as of 12/13, national on-highway diesel fuel prices are $3.65. That's up $1.09 from a year ago. So my question to the group is, when we sit here next year and have this show, is diesel above or below $3 a gallon nationally?
$3, above or below $3.
All right, so it's up $1.10 from where it was a year ago, which means it was roughly $2.50 this time last year.
Yeah, but go back another year. Go back to 2019. 2020 is not a good year to compare it to. It's a bathtub. The price of fuel was flat, and it went down for 2020 because demand was so high, and it's been growing about $1 a gallon total in 2021. So if you go back to 2019, and even go back further, if you guys remember from 2013 when it was cresting $4, right? So we're not at historic highs for diesel. They're high compared to last year's,
not
which is
historic.
normally low. So
let's go pull a random December 2019. How's that sound? It was 304.
Yeah. And then it cratered. Yeah, so I think it'll be right around $3, maybe a little more.
I'd take the over on $3. I think that there's like a lot of inflation baked in. I think that there's if it was $3 2 years ago, there's more capacity coming in, but I have a strong prior on this that I'd take like 320 or above.
Yeah, I should be writing this down.
But do you think so? The amount of electric cars are increasing, but that's affecting regular gasoline. I don't know the relationship between diesel and regular gasoline. They're not totally in sync.
No, they decoupled. I mean, it's been recent history they've decoupled. A lot of that has to do with like the holdback of wholesale and retail margins, and A lot of that arbitrage has happened with fuel discounts for larger fleets at the major truck stops. So they've really decoupled. I mean, they still generally trend. If crude oil prices doubled tomorrow, you'd see both go up to varying degrees. What you tend to see, though, is they tend to go up in rather general unison, but then when they goes down, gas responds much faster to declines in oil prices than diesel because of the holdback of the margins.
If you look back at fleets, a lot of small fleets are converting to electric, right? Because they're local. It just makes sense. Are they predominantly diesel or are they predominantly regular gas? Because that could convert. I'm wondering if the demand for diesel will go down. I don't think we're going to see large over the road Class 8 going to electric anytime soon. Sorry, Rivian. I just don't see it.
Mhm.
I don't think anything besides Sprinter vans are diesel, and even then, I think the Mercedes ones are all diesel.
And I don't know how much of the market are they consuming. They're probably a tiny little sliver compared to over the road. Yeah.
With all the port activity, those are all burning ULSD now. They can't burn bunker fuel within. I don't know if they burn bunker at all anymore, even on the ocean. Do they, Dean? Does anyone know that? You can't burn bunker within like 150 or 200 miles of the California coast anymore.
That's why they've moved them out 250 miles. Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't even think a lot of them even burnt bunker going over the ocean anymore.
I don't know. I thought you still could. And California's not a good example, right? Because you can't do anything in California.
Is California a good example of anything except the government being awful?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I've
Sorry,
got
my California friends.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Right. My question for 2022, it's been 27 years since we had a baseball strike, and the MLB went on strike again. How many games do you think we'll lose before they resolve the strike in 2022?
I gotta say, it's more than half the season, right? Like,
You think it's going to go that long?
I think it. I mean,
So I'm hearing 81 games from Ned. Ned says 81.
I think it'll cut into the preseason, and we could lose a week or two, but I think they won't miss any regular season ball. I think they'll lose some of the preseason, and I think they may shift things a la COVID. Yeah. But I just think that they're not good. Baseball's in too precarious of a position with kind of media. They've fallen so far behind all of the other sports.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean,
what does the
Manfred is a
Australians
total.
think? I mean, I know baseball's deep in the Australian blood.
Yeah, we're deep into rugby season, so baseball's really not our thing at the moment. It's just not that big. Cricket season's on. If you want to talk about cricket.
I'm sorry, I just felt you put me to sleep for a second there. What?
I guess Portland has a soccer team, and they almost won the title this year. Is that true?
Don't bring Ken, you're killing it. You're killing. So okay, all right. So final
is it professional soccer?
It's professional soccer.
That means they're 5-year-olds, right?
Oh man.
Were there orange slices? Like, did everyone get some orange slices at the end?
I think everyone gets participation.
Orange slices and a Capri Sun at the end. No. It's tie, goes to penalty kicks, and Portland loses on penalty kicks to New York. So I had a buddy who flew from New York to Portland to attend the game, and he did not have a fun return flight. Right. He is an old Portland fan.
How old can you be? I didn't even know they had a team.
I mean,
how old's the team? Like 3 or 4 years?
No, they've been around since I think 2012.
Huh.
There's been a U.S. soccer team of some sort for at least 30 years. Right?
Yeah.
Really? I thought it kind of started when Beckham came over from.
No. You're dating yourself, young man.
What do I know?
Pele played in his later years. Remember that?
Oh. Yeah. I only pay attention to the important sports. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. MLS is very popular in Portland, is all I will say.
Anyhow, how about this one? How many big M&A deals would you suspect we're going to have in 22?
In our industry, in trucking?
In our industry, yeah.
I think you're going to see more consolidation.
Let's not go to a number. Let's just say more. Will it be a more active year in 22 or a less active year than a very active 21?
More.
Yep.
More active. And let's split it up. Carriers versus brokers, asset versus non-asset, unless you see blending. I think you're going to see more merging and acquisitions on the non-asset side.
I'm seeing more multimodal acquisitions also too, Chris. You know, like large organizations buying other modes of transport to shore up their supply chain.
Yeah, so a lot of truckload carriers bought LTL
hmm
this year, which is weird.
Ocean carriers buying airlines, air cargo freighters. Yep.
Cats and dogs.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I mean, when interest rates go up, money become. I mean, again, these companies by and large aren't paying for this stuff in cash. I mean, I know some are, but they raise that cash somehow, and if they want to go tap into the, bond markets, it's going to be more expensive this upcoming year.
That was what I was going to say. Is it is extremely likely that interest rates are going to go up, and so money is not going to be as cheap.
Profit margins do go up at brokers when the market falls rapidly, though. I mean, if we're expecting an inflection, we should see broker margins on a percentage basis go up, right? Because they're locked in on contracts with their shipper. Their cost base is going to go down in cost, presumably, if spot rates fall. That could pump their margins and make them more ripe for. But it also makes them more expensive. I think you saw a lot of broker acquisitions this year because they were making a lot of dollar profits, but their profit margins were rather thin. So it made them. If you're looking at like an EBITDA multiple, money was cheap. EBITDA multiples were trading high, but the EBITDA itself was perhaps a little bit lower. But they were rocking and rolling on revenue. So you were able to go buy. I mean, look at Molo. We had Andrew Silver on. They were at like, what, $600-700 million in revenue, and ArcBest bought them for under $300 million.
There's another implication to high interest rates in the supply chain is that holding inventory gets more expensive. So what that tends to mean is that companies will push that back and hold it more centrally because the more stocking points you have, obviously, the more inventory you have. What the implication is for transportation is that the use of transportation will go up. Average length of haul tends to go up when interest rate goes up because inventory gets consolidated. We'll see if that happens
the hard way,
with e-commerce, though, because everyone's pushing stuff to, as close as possible to little micro fulfillment centers. So we'll see how that tension resolves itself.
I learned that the hard way, Chris. We had a business simulation last week, and we overproduced one of our widgets and had a $10 million inventory carrying cost that I didn't expect.
Yeah, you got to watch out for that widget production. That'll get you every time.
It gets you every single time. We have to start building that into our customer consulting engagements.
Well, that's my. We're going to do Are we going to do predictions for 2022?
We've been doing them. Toss one on the table.
Here's my prediction. Then is exactly it. We're going to have, just like Ken had too many widgets. Retail is going to be swamped with inventory. A lot of stuff's coming in, so it's a good time to be buying on discount in the first half of the year. And I think in the second half we'll have a glut of inventory for vehicles and trucks because the semiconductor backlog will start easing up, and we're going to have a glut. So I think hold off buying a truck if you can until the summer. That's my prediction. Inventory will balloon.
Great.
I mean, I hear you, but how many people, even if you ordered a truck like in this summer, are going to be getting their truck by next summer?
No, you can. I almost bought a truck, so
you did. Okay.
2 months for a Toyota Tacoma. I had to wait 2 months, so I said screw it, and I bought a 10-year-old one for way too much money. But I got it. I got it the next day.
I felt like an idiot for what I paid in July for my F-150. My new, I was looking on Car Trader or whatever, Auto Trader every single morning to look for new inventory coming in. I bought it for a hair off sticker price and felt like a total dork. They're going for like $7,000 to $10,000 over sticker right now.
Yeah. It's
so
crazy.
I made money.
Yeah. So not only do you get to wait 2 to 3 months, you get to pay more. So
the added benefit.
Yeah, but it'll. So they had like 40 coming in at this one place I went in the next 2 months, but all but like 4 were already bought. Right. But I think that'll ease. I think it'll ease up. I don't know about large tractors, Class 8, but I think personal vehicles, I think will loosen up.
All right, so let's go around the horn, and if we're doing big predictions, I'm going to ask one question at the end. So don't predict everything but rates. I don't want to tease my question. So, Dean, your big narrative for next year.
Carriers won't be protesting in front of the White House this year for record low spot rates.
They will or they won't?
They won't.
Okay.
Dean with the minus 600 money line.
There, Dean.
It's a safe bet.
All right, Ned? My hot take is that things will go back to normal, but normal won't look like old normal. Like there's been so many changes and dislocations in the market. There's been a lot of hysteresis. So like you're not going to see shocks be as completely distorting. Like right now there's just no slack in anything. And so any shock balloons out to really crazy proportions. see the polar vortex back in the early part of the year, or what have you. So there will become more slack in the market, but just because there's more slack in the market doesn't mean it's going to go back to looking like 2019 or January 2020.
So my warm take, because I don't know, I think there's so many hot takes, I don't know which one to pick. I think if I was taking like the odds-on favorite, I trust the one thing I trust more than anything is that the government will screw this up. So my take largely rests on not major, like not 2008 level, but like one click down from that economic calamity happening in 22. I think it could be one of a number of things. It could be this huge, this glut of inventories that puts pressure on retailers' margins. I think most likely it's going to be a labor shortage, labor issue. I was having a great conversation with a contact of mine in the industry that loved the infrastructure bill, could not pick a worse time in the last 20 years to pass it. I mean, who's going to fill these potholes? Who's going to go pick up the shovel and go do the work? I think there's a lot of simmering underlying economic tensions. So I think my prediction would be the 22 is going to look a lot like the tail half of 18 heading into 19 from a percentage standpoint, not from an absolute standpoint. I don't think we ever dip down to 20. I think that ship has sailed to assume we're ever going to get back to 2019 absolute pricing levels. But I would not be surprised if we were sitting here next year talking about 20 to 25% reduction in spot prices year over year. I would be seeing that by the 4th of July.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen, I look more at the contract than the spot. And so I think what's going to happen is it'll regress to the mean. And the mean is that compounded annual growth rate, typically last 10 years, 3.5%. Maybe that'll peak up to 4 to 5%. But it's not going to, I agree with you 100%, Ken. It's not going to be a sudden drop. It'll be a stalling, catching up to the inflation line.
Yeah. I mean, these driver pay increases, Forward Air, I think, announced like a 7.9% GRI to go along with big increases on the cost side. It's just, I think everyone is overcompensating for what's happened the last 2 years, whether it's inventories, whether it's driver pay, whether it's buying of equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
There was an interesting trend that, everyone said e-commerce increased by 5 years and 5 months and all that stuff. And it's true. If you look at Q2 of 2020, it went way up. But if you take the historical line, the growth line of internet or e-commerce buying, it meets where it is right now. So we actually have come down. The last 5 quarters, we've gone down. The percentage of going to e-commerce has decreased. And so we are regressing back to that mean for e-commerce. So it had a blip, but we're back to our historical growth rates there. So I think what you were saying, Ned, is true. We're returning to normalish, but not as normal as it was before.
Yeah. I know we've run long. Do we have time for some listener questions?
Well, I got to get to our big question, which is rates. This time next year, on a percentage basis, the main one we track, right? Long haul, dry van, spot. What is the percentage change from where we sit today? I'll start with Chris.
I think it'll be down 20%. How's that?
Down 20.
Yep. Write it down.
Ned.
Dean?
I'm going with 15%. I think.
Which way?
Down. Yeah, good. I think 220 is about where we'll be on dry van.
Ned?
I would take down less than 5%. I think it's going to be mostly, like, again, if we look at today versus today a year from now, it's going to be more flat than you'd think.
Right.
I'm going down 25%. What was yours, Dean?
15 down to 220.
So Chris is 20, Dean is 15, I'm 25, and Ned is wrong. So we have all four.
All right.
Bracket. So we're all, and then what do you think about contracts? Do you think the same percentage apply to contract rates? Because, spot rates the weather, contracts are the climate, right? And so our contract rates have been increasing steadily, although the new rate differential, which measures the amount of the rates coming in versus the rates that were retired, has been 10 to 15% constant through 2021. And so we've gone up 10 to 14%. What do you think is going to happen this time next year for contract rates?
I think down 5, Chris, because of I think we'll see more mini bids on the other side of the ledger, which is as capacity eases, they'll be doing more mini bids to try and recoup procurement costs from this year.
Sure. Ned, what do you think?
I'm not as good on the contract side. I'm not.
Channel your inner dinosaur.
Okay. All right. I would go to flat. I think that the spot tracks the contract. If you're going to be making like long-term weather predictions, your long-term climate prediction should be similar.
Ken, any thoughts?
-5 is already taken by Dean, so I guess I'll say -6.
I'm going to go down 15%.
Contracts down 15.
Yep. Compared to where they are right now.
Right.
Yep.
That's smoking.
Wow.
All right. So we're
No one
locked in.
remembers these anyway. No one remembers these forecasts.
True. You're only as good as your next prediction. All right. Hit us with the 2 listener questions, Ned, and then we'll wrap up. It's 10:30.
Robert Hayes, Dean, any chance of Q1 relief on the West Coast ports once the Chinese New Year holiday hits?
Great question. I've just pulled up the data while we've been chatting here. I don't see it. And the reason I say it is that since last October, the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach have never really gotten above 30 container ships at berth at any one time. That's basically a straight line from a throughput capacity perspective. But since this time last year, we had about 20 vessels waiting. Today, it's 101. And the big difference is with 101, and that's almost up 5 times since June this year. The difference is they've moved the number of vessels out to the 40-mile mark. So inside 40 miles, there's 30. That's dropping, but that's a little bit misleading because the 71 outside the 40-mile mark are either just drifting or slow steaming from Asia. So looking at the count of TEUs that are in the queuing system, it's well north of 500,000, which of course is less than a quarter of a typical month's worth of TEU imports. It's not that big in the bigger scheme of things, but the throughput issue is the bigger issue. It's going to take quite a few weeks, if not months, to clear this backlog on the West Coast. So I don't see much relief in in Q1, maybe early Q2.
We had a lot of questions come in. I'm not sure that we have the time to handle them all, but at least let's do David Miller. What impact do you think electric trucks will have on jobs? I mean,
you're going to have to buy some grounded tools as a mechanic and complain about it. That's about it in the next 3 years.
Well, the machining, the number of parts. So manufacturing is much simpler, right? So the number of parts is like an order of magnitude or 2 lower. So on the manufacturing side, you're going to lose jobs. But on the driver's side and maintenance, I think you might increase. Personally.
No, yeah, I don't think it's going to have any real impact on our side of the fence.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, run them. Who cares?
All right. Mirza Begovic, what's your expectation about when markets will go down?
Late Q1, early Q2. We'll start to see year-over-year inflection. Anyone else disagree?
No.
And spot.
And contract will follow that, just lagging a little bit.
Probably a quarter, yeah. Right.
Robert Hayes, how much of current truckload demand is backlog versus new order demand?
If you can answer quickly, Robert, with this follow-up question, are you talking about the order, like truckload unit orders, like people ordering Class 8 trucks, or are you talking about the demand for truckload transportation? If you can hit us back with that response, we'll try to get you in before the end of the show. Next.
Ferris Carrick, what kind of impact will the Kentucky situation have on the trucking industry in general?
I'd say think of it like a hurricane. What do you think, Dean?
Yeah, I think so. It's a fairly long but narrow band of impact across 4 or 5 states. So, yep.
It's more localized because if you see what the impact, though, is different from a hurricane. Yeah. You can see some plants that were right next to the other ones that weren't touched.
Yeah.
So it's as a hurricane, it tends to be more equal. So
there might be some long-term impacts given what we've been finding out about the Amazon workers in the plant that collapsed. So there might be some additional labor regulations going to come in, but we'll see
about the whole
Kentucky labor regulations.
I know it's crazy, but
they do say Kentucky's the California of the lower south central United States.
Well, there's pressure to unionize Amazon too, and this will add to that fire. I mean, right now unions are hot, and they're making hay while the sun shines.
I mean, they're striking at the they've authorized a strike at the grocery store chain out in our neck of the woods, and that's the basis for my baseball.
We have 2 Boston Starbucks that are deciding to unionize, and I heard that Dean is thinking about unionizing DAT.
Well, at least we know this recording won't be available for future listening.
Yeah, no, please don't get the NRLB involved. They're real.
Dean's going to bring his Teamster rep to our next one-on-one.
Right.
All right, next.
Ringo Guzman, when forecasting the market, does that include the southeast and northeast coasts?
It includes the whole country.
Yep.
We forecast something like 60,000 lanes every single day, so it has all of that fun stuff included in it.
Follow-up from Robert Hayes, it's the demand for capacity. How much?
I mean, it's both then, right? I mean, it's how do you disentangle new versus backlog? It's just it's demand that didn't exist, and it's demand that's rolled over because it wasn't covered. So I think it's a healthy mix of both, and it really depends on what market you're in. Any other commentary?
No.
I mean, capacity is not like widgets, right? Like you can put a widget in a warehouse, you can't put a truck of freight moving down the highway.
You can't drop a truckload on service on your foot.
Yeah.
Right.
Alex Lane, possibility that flatbed rates will go down more than 250 on average. 250.
Below 250, absolutely. I think
Where are they now?
right at about 255, 56. I think national average.
Then yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Higher interest rates will put deflationary pressure on the housing industry, which is a major consumable sector for flatbed. It won't be offset by the fracking industry, which is more specialized and frankly doesn't even appear too much in some of our data sets.
All
One
right.
more.
Robert Hayes, so likely as we get closer to equilibrium in Q3 and Q4 22, spot will be cheaper than contract. Stick with the mini bid model next year versus locking in a longer term network for RFP as a shipper.
Yeah, that's what shippers are doing. Their annual RFP is not going away. It's being more focused, and some people going to 6 months and doing that. As the market gets softer, look for that to go longer again. It's just a classic playbook for a tight market. Shorter contracts, you're trying to minimize your damage in the market.
Right.
And I think pull that forward a couple quarters, Robert. I don't know if we're going to see things flip in Q3 or Q4. I think it'll be Q2, Q3 before that happens. All right, I'm going to wrap us. We're 45 minutes here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks for Chris for taking time out of your morning to join us. We plan to be here next week. I think we're going to have a little preview of something really cool we're working on that involves recommending. I'm not even going to tease what it is. It's a recommender system project that we've been working on. I think it's really cool. I'd recommend if you have a slow week, checking us out next week. We're going to have a live demo of that from one of our product managers. Chris has Freightvine podcast. When does the one that we did already come out, Chris?
The one it comes out this Thursday, so we'll have.
So this Thursday, you're going to hear all of us talk without.
Yep.
Yeah. Without the video, Dean has real quick.
Radio Nemo this Thursday on Road Dog Channel 146 with Jimmy Mack Live.
Cool. And again, we plan to be here next week to do that. I'm guessing Santa's going to give us the week off between Christmas and New Year's, and then we'll be ready to roll into 22 with more great content. If you have any ideas, like we called for themes last year, we got a bunch of them. As you're thinking about it over the holidays, feel free to send us a askiq@dat.com if there's something or someone you want us to talk to or talk about next year on the show. So with that, we'll see you next week to round out 21, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Goodbye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.